I'll defend him. The words cut through the packed courtroom like a glass hitting marble. Every head turned at once. The judge paused mid-sentence. The stenographer's fingers froze above the keys. A few people in the gallery actually laughed out loud before they even saw who had spoken. At the very back of the courtroom, a young black woman stood up slowly. Her apron was still tied around her waist, the white straps streaked with a splash of coffee and a faint smear of cleaning solvent. Her tight curls were pulled back into a low bun, a few strands stuck to her forehead, with sweat. In her hands, held like armor, was a worn manila folder, edges softened from too many nights of use. Phones went up immediately. Record, zoom in, share. Who said that? Back there. You kidding me? The maid? A man in a gray suit near the aisle snorted. What's next? He muttered, not very quietly. The janitor presiding over trial? Laughter rippled through the benches, low and cruel. But the woman didn't flinch. Her name was Imani Rhodes, 25 years old, and this was the moment her life, in a billionaire's, would split in two. She took a breath that seemed to come all the way from the soles of her shoes. Your Honor, she said, voice steady, carrying all the way to the bench. My name is Imani Rhodes. I want to stand as temporary counsel for Mr. Cassian Holt. That name, Cassian Holt, sent a new wave of murmurs through the room. Cassian Holt, the Cassian Holt, tech billionaire, market darling, the man who'd turned a scrappy startup into a global cloud empire, charismatic on magazine covers, ruthless in negotiations, and now, defendant. Facing federal charges of contract fraud and financial misconduct measuring in the tens of millions. The judge, an older man with severe eyebrows and a reputation for zero patience, blinked like he'd been splashed with cold water. Miss Rhodes, is it? He said slowly. You wish to stand as temporary counsel for Mr. Holt? Yes, Your Honor. Seated at the defense table, Cassian turned to look for the first time. His custom navy suit was immaculate, but his tie was loosened slightly, a small detail that said more about his stress than any headline. Where a high-priced attorney was supposed to be, the chair next to him sat empty. It hadn't been empty yesterday. His star lawyer, Miles Dunning, had built an entire brand on defending the ultra-rich from white-collar charges. But that morning, when court convened, his chair had remained vacant. Calls went straight to voicemail. His office claimed he was out of the country on business. Rumor in the hallway said something less polite. He'd run. Now, in his place, stood the woman everyone in this room knew only as the maid. Cassian stared at Imani like she'd just crawled out of the ceiling. You, he snapped, loud enough for the microphones in the room to pick up. You should be back at my penthouse polishing silver, not playing dress-up in a courtroom? A few people laughed. Someone actually clapped once, as if it were a good joke. Imani's jaw tightened, but she didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, she said quietly, his attorney has abandoned him. His legal team is gone. I may not look like what this room expects, but I know this case. I know it better than anyone here. Across the aisle, the prosecutor rose from her seat with a fluid, practiced movement. Victoria Hale, tall, blonde, every hair in place, navy suit cut so sharply it could slice paper. She'd built her career on complex economic crime and enjoyed every second of the spotlight. Your Honor, she said, lips curved, eyes hard. This is absurd. With respect, allowing household staff to wander into counsel's role isn't just irregular. It's insulting to the integrity of this court. A few people chuckled again. The phones kept recording. The judge raised a hand, silencing the reaction. Miss Rhodes, he said carefully, are you a licensed attorney in the state of New York? Imani swallowed. No, Your Honor. I completed 2 years at Columbia Law. I had to withdraw when my mother got sick, and we couldn't pay both hospital bills and tuition. Since then, I've worked in private homes. But I never stopped studying. I followed economic crime rulings. I've read transcripts, briefs, SEC filings. In this case, she lifted the battered folder slightly. I've studied every contract, every filing, every financial record tied to it. Night after night, for almost a year. The room shifted. You know that sound when a crowd goes from entertained to uneasy? That subtle, almost physical quiet? That's what settled over the benches. For the first time, Victoria's smirk wavered. Your Honor, she said, a little sharper, regardless of whatever personal reading she's done, this woman is not an officer of the court. She is not qualified to represent Mr. Holt in any capacity. The judge leaned back, thinking. His gaze moved from Victoria to the empty defense chair, then to Cassian, then back to Imani, still standing at the back in her apron. As Mr. Holt's retained counsel has failed to appear, he said slowly, and as this is a preliminary hearing, the court is in an unusual situation. If, he emphasized the word, Mr. Holt agrees to allow Miss Rhodes to speak on his behalf under my strict supervision, I am prepared to permit it for today only. All eyes shifted to Cassian. He looked like he'd been asked whether he'd prefer drowning or burning. You expect me, he hissed, leaning toward the microphone, to let the maid, my maid, speak for me in federal court? Imani finally looked at him. Up close, he was everything the business magazines showed. Strong jaw, steel blue eyes, the kind of face people instinctively believed, the kind that usually didn't need defending. She stepped closer, just enough that only he and the microphone between them could hear clearly. Mr. Holt, she said, her voice low but firm, your lawyer has vanished. The government wants to make an example out of you. The people in those suits, she flicked a glance at the plaintiff's side, have had months to build a story. Right now, I am the only person in this room who has read every page of your contracts without billing you by the hour. I am the only one in this room not trying to bury you. Her eyes didn't waver. And whether you see an apron or a degree when you look at me, I know exactly how they're setting you up. Behind them, someone whispered, damn, if you've ever been talked down to because of your job, your accent, your skin, you know that silence that follows. A silence where everyone is suddenly waiting to see if you'll sit back down and prove them right. Imani didn't sit. Cassian stared at her, jaw working, anger and fear fighting behind his eyes. Then with a disgusted little exhale, he waved a hand. Fine, he growled. Do your worst. Imani nodded once. She walked down the aisle toward the defense table, that apron swaying gently with each step. The cameras followed her like she was walking a red carpet, but there was nothing glamorous about the way her fingers tightened on that folder. At the table, she opened it. Inside were color-coded tabs, handwritten notes crammed into margins, printouts of contracts with entire sections highlighted, sticky notes stuck to sticky notes. This wasn't a hobby. This was obsession. Victoria folded her arms across her chest, chin tilted. I hope you brought more than highlighters and grocery lists, she murmured. Imani looked up at her briefly. I brought facts, she said, and you'd be surprised what you can find when the person cleaning the office is also reading the footnotes. A few quiet gasps. Even the bailiff's mouth twitched. The judge cleared his throat. Proceed, Miss Rhodes. Imani lifted the first page. On March 12th of last year, she began, voice projected now, smooth and clear, Holt Systems was asked to revise its joint venture agreement with a company known as Orion Holdings. The plaintiff claims my client forged this revision, altering core terms without consent. But the digital signature trail tells a different story. She held up two printouts, one from the SEC filing, one from the disputed contract. This, she said, is the original filing, submitted and timestamped from a New York IP address, and this, she lifted the second, is the revision that supposedly implicates my client. It was executed from an IP address in Zurich, Switzerland. At the same exact minute, my client's calendar shows him speaking on stage at a conference in San Francisco. The gallery leaned in. Imani's voice did not shake once. If anyone forged anything, she continued, the evidence so far suggests it was not my client. It suggests someone else crafted a revision offshore, then routed the signature trail through a remote login designed to mimic his credentials. Victoria stood. Objection, speculation. Imani didn't look at her. I'm not speculating, Your Honor. I'm reading from the plaintiff's own metadata logs, which they attached to their discovery responses. She flipped the page so the judge could see the tiny printed line at the bottom. Zurich server, Orion's encrypted VPN, not Holt Systems. The judge leaned forward, squinting. In the gallery, the same people who joked about a maid playing lawyer were suddenly very quiet. For 10 more minutes, Imani walked the court through the contracts, not like a student reciting a memorized answer, but like someone who had lived inside the documents. She pointed out phrasing that didn't match Cassian's usual agreements. She referenced prior rulings on manufactured breach. She quoted by docket number a case from 3 years earlier where a similar IP trail had been used to frame a mid-level executive. This wasn't theatrics. This was a woman who had done the reading when no one was watching. By the time she stopped, the room felt different. The judge set his pen down and tapped it lightly on the bench. "This is compelling," he said carefully. "The court will recess until tomorrow to review the evidence presented and to determine whether Miss Rhodes may continue to participate in these proceedings." His gaze softened just a fraction. "Miss Rhodes, you may return tomorrow morning, and for the record, I expect the plaintiff to be equally prepared." The gavel came down. Imani exhaled for what felt like the first time in 15 minutes. Cassian didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything at all. But when he stood to leave, he didn't look quite as alone as he had when the empty defense chair sat mocking him. Outside the courthouse, the rain had started. Reporters clustered at the steps, microphones thrust forward. A few shouted questions, some already live streaming. "Is it true you're just a maid? Did you really study the case on your own? Do you think this is a stunt?" Imani kept walking, head down, folder tucked tightly under her arm. Someone in the crowd called out, "Hey, you were incredible in there." Another voice added, "Don't let them shut you up." Maybe they were just chasing a viral moment. Maybe not. But if you've ever had your entire existence reduced to a job title, you understand how even a single voice of respect can feel like oxygen. By the time she reached the subway, her apron was damp and clung to her legs. She untied it and folded it into her bag like she was putting away a costume. On the train back to Queens, phone screens around her lit up with the same clip. The moment she said, "I'll defend him," replayed from 3 different angles. Comments were already popping up. "Is this real? Scripted? Imagine being defended by the woman who scrubs your floors." She pretended not to see it. Her stop came. She climbed the cracked station stairs and walked the 3 blocks to the brick building she called home. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and bleach. An old TV blared from behind one door. Somewhere upstairs, a baby cried. Imani unlocked the basement apartment and stepped into the tiny space. The kitchen table was exactly as she'd left it, strewn with printouts, law textbooks with cracked spines, sticky notes layered like scales. A chipped mug sat in the center, cold coffee ring dried at the bottom. 3 years ago, she'd started hiding her casebooks under this very table, so her landlords wouldn't ask why the maid had law school texts she clearly couldn't afford. Now those same books were her weapons. She hung her coat, dropped her bag, and sat. The silence hummed in her ears louder than the courtroom had. For a long moment, she just stared at the contracts. Then she pulled one closer. Something had bothered her when she first read it, a phrase in the revised joint venture clause, a string of words that felt wrong. Today, adrenaline had held that nagging thought under the surface. Now it floated back up. She grabbed a pen and circled a sentence. Contingent leverage restructuring to be executed upon unilateral performance deviation. She opened an older contract from Holt's archives, one she'd printed on her lunch break months ago when no one was watching. Cassian's legal team had always favored clean, straightforward language. This kind of tangled European-style phrasing didn't match. "Who talks like this?" she muttered. "Corporate lawyers who weren't from New York, that's who." She scribbled a note to herself in the margin. Compare Orion revisions versus old Holt deals. Check language origin. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A low, amused male voice slid into her ear. "You really know how to light a match, Miss Rhodes." Her stomach dropped. "Who is this?" "Let's just say," the voice replied, "I was in that courtroom today, and I didn't expect the girl in the apron to flip the table." She said nothing. "You're poking a bear," he continued, tone still smooth, almost friendly. "You might want to be careful where you stick the stick." The line clicked dead. Imani sat there, phone pressed to her ear long after the call ended. Fear wasn't new to her. She'd grown up with it. Fear of eviction notices, fear of overdue medical bills, fear of watching her mother cough and not having the money for the specialist. But this fear was different, colder, calculated. She set the phone down gently, like it might explode. Then she did the only thing she knew how to do when the world tried to scare her back into silence. She opened another file. By the time dawn's first gray light touched the basement window, her notes were thicker. Her eyes burned. But patterns had started to emerge. The revision Cassian was accused of forging? It didn't just look foreign, it looked deliberate. The next morning, she arrived at Holt Tower earlier than any maid had a right to. The skyscraper cut into the Manhattan skyline like a blade, all steel and glass. Imani entered through the service entrance, as always, past the security guards who nodded without really seeing her, through the humming kitchen where chefs prepped for the day, up the back elevator that opened near the private offices. Today, instead of heading to the laundry room or the guest suites, she walked straight toward Cassian's corner office. His assistant, a young man in a slim suit with perfect hair and permanent impatience, stepped in front of her. "Staff doesn't come down this hall without a work order," he snapped. "This is executive." The office door opened. Cassian looked up from behind his desk, irritation already loaded on his face. "I didn't ask for housekeeping," he said. Imani met his eyes. "You also didn't ask for someone to keep you out of federal prison," she replied calmly. "But here we are." The assistant's mouth fell open. Cassian studied her for a long, tense beat. "Give us a minute," he told the assistant finally. The door closed behind Imani with a soft thud. For the first time, they were alone without cameras, without a judge, without an audience waiting to see the maid fail. "You think yesterday changed anything?" he asked, leaning back, fingers steepled. "Hale will tear you apart next time. And when this is over, you'll go back to scrubbing baseboards and I'll—" He faltered for the first time. "I'll be ruined anyway." "I don't think yesterday fixed everything," Imani said. "I think it cracked a door. The question is, do you want to push it open or let them slam it on your neck?" He frowned. "Start talking." She set her folder on his desk and opened to a page marked with 3 different colors of ink. "Did you personally open and read the revised Orion agreement before you signed it?" she asked. He hesitated. The kind of hesitation you only see in people who are used to never admitting they skimmed the fine print. "My team handles that," he said finally. "Noah preps the files. I sign." "Noah? Price?" Imani asked. "The assistant, the one who just tried to block her, the one who used to stay late in the office when she vacuumed the carpets." Cassian nodded. "He routes everything through our secure system, or did. He resigned a month before all this dropped. Said he needed time away from the pressure." Imani's heartbeat kicked faster. "So the document that supposedly proves you're a fraud was revised offshore in Zurich," she said slowly, "using phrasing you've never used in any other deal. And the assistant who controlled your digital signatures left quietly just before the lawsuit hit." She met his eyes. "Mr. Holt, I don't think you're the one who forged anything. I think someone used your trust and your inattention to build a trap." He looked away, jaw tight. "You're implying my own staff helped frame me." "I'm saying," she replied, "that someone with access to your systems opened a door for Orion. And if you want to live through this, we need to find out who and why." An hour later, Imani stood in front of an old brick building on the edge of Midtown, her coat pulled tight against the wind. The directory by the door still listed Noah Price, contract consultant among a cluster of startup names. She buzzed the suite. No answer. A delivery guy pushed the door open on his way out, and she slipped inside, ignoring the stab of guilt. Survival doesn't always leave room for perfect etiquette. Down the hall, Noah's glass-fronted office stood with the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and panic. Drawers gaped open. File boxes sat half-emptied on the floor. A monitor was gone from the desk, leaving behind a square of dust. If you've ever walked into a room after someone has left in a hurry, you know that feeling. The sense that the space itself is mid-flinch. Imani stepped carefully around the boxes. On the floor near the desk, half hidden under a toppled binder, something caught her eye. A manila folder, different from the others. No label on the tab, just a faint pen mark along the edge. She knelt and opened it. Inside were 3 copies of the same contract draft. The Holt Orion joint venture. One copy bore the familiar New York metadata in the footer. Another showed Zurich, CH, encrypted VPN. The third, Newark, NJ, remote session. 3 versions, 3 locations, 1 supposed signature. Imani's throat went dry. Someone hadn't just stumbled into a mistake. This was architecture, a carefully built maze with Cassian Holt at the center. She clutched the folder to her chest, fingers digging into the cardboard. In that quiet, empty office, with the city humming far above her, the maid who had never been meant to sit in a courtroom understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about one billionaire's fall from grace. Someone had turned the law itself into a weapon, and she had just placed her hand on the barrel. For a long moment in Noah Price's stripped office, Amani just stood there with the three contracts in her hands. Same deal, same parties. Three different digital fingerprints. One from Holt Systems' headquarters in Manhattan, one from Zurich, one from a small server hub in Newark. If you've ever had a bad feeling about something and tried to ignore it, you know what it's like when the proof finally lands in your palms. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like gravity. She slid the drafts back into the folder, pressed it against her chest, and left the building without looking back. On the street, New York roared around her, taxis honking, a street vendor shouting about hot dogs, the wind cutting between buildings. No one knew that in the maid's bag swinging at her hip was the skeleton key to a billion-dollar trap. That night, the kitchen table in her basement apartment looked more like a war room than anything related to domestic life. Contracts spread from edge to edge, highlighters uncapped and bleeding onto the wood, her old laptop wheezing under the weight of too many open tabs, court databases, law blogs, a VPN map she barely understood but had stared at long enough to see patterns. She laid the three contracts side by side. New York draft, clean, straightforward phrasing, Holt's usual style. Zurich draft, ornate, convoluted, clauses twisted around each other like ivy. Exactly the kind of legal dialect she'd seen in European cases she'd read for fun when she couldn't sleep. Newark draft, an intermediate version. Some language matched the Zurich file. Some still mirrored Holt's. Someone had moved this deal like a chess piece across borders, letting the metadata tell a story Cassian never actually wrote. Imani grabbed her phone. There was only one person she trusted with this who wasn't already tangled in the case. "Jamal?" she said when the line picked up. "Wow," a warm baritone answered. "I was wondering when the famous Miss Rhodes would remember her old study partner." She smiled despite the knot in her chest. "Did you see the clip?" she asked. "Did I see it?" he scoffed. "Half the city saw it. My editor tried to assign someone else, and I almost threw my coffee at him. What are you doing in federal court, Monty?" "Trying to stop a billionaire from being turned into a game piece," she said softly, "and maybe something more than that." The humor faded from his voice. "What do you need?" "Everything you can find on Orion Holdings," she said, "and their general counsel, whoever drafted their offshore strategy." Jamal whistled low. "You don't start small, do you?" "I don't have time to start small." He sighed into the phone. "All right, meet me at Manny's on Queens Boulevard in an hour. Bring whatever you've got, and bring cash. My boss cut my expense account after I called his last piece clickbait with a tie." An hour later, she slid into a cracked red booth at Manny's Diner, the neon lights buzzing softly overhead. Jamal Ruiz looked almost exactly like he had in law school. Same unruly curls, same glasses, perpetually sliding down his nose. Same permanent exhaustion, only now it came with a press badge clipped to his jacket. He flipped through the copies she'd brought, his face growing more serious with every page. "Okay," he said quietly, tapping the Zurich footer. "So this isn't just sloppy. This is engineered. Orion's general counsel is a guy named Gideon Lark, old school shark. Spent a decade at a London firm specializing in contractual leverage, which is polite legal code for weaponized paper." Imani frowned. "Contractual leverage?" Jamal nodded. "They draft clauses designed to manufacture breach, then use that breach to force a renegotiation. They don't win in the market. They win in the fine print. Lark's name has popped up in 2 sealed whistleblower cases I've tried to pry open." He slid a thin folder across to her. "I pulled what I could on short notice. There's a pattern. Companies partnering with Orion see unexpected disputes a year or two later. Quiet settlements, NDAs. A few anonymous sources say Lark's team actually fabricates digital trails to frame the partners as the bad actors." Imani's skin prickled. "So they pick a target, build a paper story that makes them look like a liar, then crush them under their own fake evidence. You're describing Tuesday in corporate law, Jamal said dryly. But yeah, that's the gist. She pointed at the 3 drafts. Could they have used Noah to route this through Zurich? To make it look like Cassian signed something he never even saw? Easily, Jamal said. You get someone on the inside who controls signatures, emails, remote logins. You set up a VPN tunnel to Zurich. You craft the perfect revision. Then when the timing's right, you hit him with a lawsuit and say, see? Look what you did. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. This isn't just about Holt, Monty. If what you've got is real, this is their whole business model. A waitress dropped off 2 coffees and a plate of fries. Amani wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat bite into her fingers. It grounded her. Can you get me anything on Lark's internal memos? She asked. Anything that proves they planned this before the revision? Jamal grimaced. Internal memos don't just fall off trucks. Neither do 3 versions of the same contract, she said quietly. But here we are. He stared at her for a long beat. Then, give me 48 hours. I'll call a guy I know in data forensics. He owes me. But Monty, what? You need to be careful, he said. People like Lark don't play fair, and they don't like it when the help starts reading the script. On her way out, as she paid the bill, she noticed a man sitting alone at the counter. Early 50s, stone-pale eyes, expensive coat that didn't fit the diner. He watched her with a kind of clinical interest, like she was an exhibit. They locked eyes for half a second. He didn't look away. Imani did. Outside, the cold hit her face like a warning. The next morning in court, the room felt different. More crowded, more cameras, less laughter. People who had joked about the maid with the mop and the legal dream now craned their necks to see her as she took her place at the defense table. Cassian glanced up when she sat. He didn't smile, but he also didn't look through her like furniture. Victoria Hale approached with a new binder, her heels cracking against the marble floor. Round 2, Miss Rhodes, she asked as they waited for the judge. Did you bring extra highlighters this time, or just the same conspiracy theories? Amani looked at her calmly. I brought receipts, she said. That's usually what scares people who are used to writing their own version of reality. Victoria's eyes hardened. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Once they were seated again, he adjusted his glasses. Miss Rhodes, the court has reviewed your initial presentation, he said. You raised questions regarding the origin of the disputed contract. Do you have anything further before we turn to Ms. Hale? Yes, Your Honor, Amani said, standing. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit 3 drafts of the Holt-Orion joint venture agreement obtained from the defense's own archives and associated digital discovery. She held up the folder from Noah's office. These drafts bear different metadata and IP logs, one from Holt's New York headquarters, one from an Orion-linked server in Zurich, and one from a remote location in New Jersey used by Mr. Holt's former contracts assistant. The courtroom buzzed. Victoria shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. We have no assurance as to where these documents came from. They could have been altered yesterday, for all we know. Imani didn't look away from the judge. The documents were retrieved from an office leased by Mr. Noah Price, formerly in charge of Mr. Holt's contract routing, she said. They matched the contents and formatting of discovery provided by the plaintiff. The only difference is the metadata they didn't expect anyone to read. The judge held out a hand for the bailiff to bring the folder. He flipped through the pages, eyes scanning the tiny print at the bottom. Zurich VPN, he murmured. Newark remote session. He set them down slowly. I will allow these into the preliminary record, he said. Ms. Hale, the court expects a full explanation for these discrepancies at our next sitting. In the meantime, I'm ordering an independent digital forensics review. Victoria's jaw tightened so hard Imani could almost hear it. After the hearing, as they stepped into the corridor, Cassian caught Imani's elbow. How exactly did you get those? He asked. Your ex-assistant left his office in a hurry, she replied. He didn't take everything with him. You broke in? She met his eyes. I walked through a door someone else left open, kind of like what they did to you. He stared at her for a long, measuring beat. You should have told me, he said. You would have told your people, she replied. And some of your people are the problem. His gaze sharpened. And you're not afraid? Of what happens if you're wrong? I'm more afraid of what happens if I pretend I didn't see, she said. That's how people like Lark win. Everyone looks the other way because they're scared of the fallout. He said nothing. But later, when she passed through the kitchen at Holt Tower to grab a stack of old house accounts she needed to cross-check, the head chef nodded at her in a way he never had before. Respect. Not because she cleaned the ovens well, she always had, but because she had stood up when a room full of powerful people expected her to sit down. In the afternoon, she slipped into Noah's old workspace in Holt Tower. It smelled different from the co-working office. Less desperation, more polished wood and filtered air. She pulled open drawers, checking for anything he might have left. Staplers, old name tags, an unused key card. Then in the back of the bottom drawer, her fingers brushed something heavy. A black leather planner. She lifted it out and opened it. Most pages held boring notes. Call times, client names, reminders to order toner. But on the week of April 10th, squeezed between Orion call and board Q&A, was a small yellow sticky note. Zurich packet 3912. Her heart kicked hard once against her ribs. Locker code, courier label? She took a photo, then slipped the planner into her bag. As she turned, she realized Cassian was standing in the doorway. He hadn't knocked. His expression was unreadable. I should have noticed, he said quietly. All the little things Noah suddenly wanted to handle personally. All the nights he stayed late and told me not to worry. You trusted him, she said. That's not a crime. But letting that trust blind you now would be. He looked at her. And you, he asked, what do you want out of this, Miss Rhodes? Aside from the satisfaction of proving everyone in that courtroom wrong about you? She hesitated. It was the first time he'd asked her anything that wasn't an accusation. Justice, she said finally. For you, maybe. But also for everyone who never even gets into the room to argue. People whose names never make it into the headline. People who lose everything because somebody with better lawyers and a quieter conscience decided to weaponize the law. He studied her for a long moment. You're wasting your brilliance scrubbing marble floors, he said. No, she replied softly. I've been training. The next morning, she stood in a small, sterile lobby in Jersey City, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The sign on the wall read, Metro Secure Storage Solutions. A woman with purple nails and a bored expression sat behind the counter, scrolling her phone. Locker access, the woman asked, chewing gum without looking up. Imani slid a sticky note across the counter. 3912, she said. I'm collecting for a former client. Office relocation mix-up. The woman sighed, typed something into her computer, then squinted at Imani's ID. Price, she said finally. Yeah, he dropped something here 8 weeks ago. Never came back for it. Lockers are down the hall on the left. She handed over a small metal key. Imani walked down the corridor, heart pounding harder with each step. Locker 3912 opened with a dry metallic click. Inside was a single manila envelope. No label, just a red wax seal stamped with a stylized O. Orion. For a second, she just stared at it. Then she slid it into her coat, locked the compartment again, and left, every instinct in her screaming at her to move, move, move. Back in her apartment, she shut the door, slid the chain, and sat down at the table. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a printed memo and a small black USB drive. The memo's header stopped her breath. Internal counsel only. Strictly confidential from Gideon Lark, Chief Legal Officer, Orion Holdings II, Executive Board, she read. And the more she read, the colder she felt. The memo didn't talk about partnership. It talked about capture, strategic legal architecture, they called it, recommendations for creating negotiation leverage through reputational pressure, sample clauses designed to manufacture grounds for breach, guidelines for remote signature routing, to ensure plausible deniability while preserving leverage options. One paragraph in particular made her stomach flip. In the event of resistance from Holt Systems, it read, we recommend initiating litigation under pretext of misrepresentation, supported by a controlled revision trail executed via offshore VPNs. This will permit a forced acquisition at significantly reduced valuation and neutralize Mr. Holt's reputation as a future market competitor. Second, at the end of the memo, a line item, projected litigation leverage value, $24.7 million. They had budgeted the lawsuit. Imani stared at the pages so long the words blurred. Then she opened her laptop and plugged in the USB. Folders blossomed on the screen. Draft timelines, internal projections, Email chains, spreadsheets with headings like Phase 2, Public Narrative, and Target Breach Window. Every line was another brick in a fortress built on fraud. An hour later, she sat in Cassian's office again, this time placing the memo in front of him without a word. He skimmed the first paragraph, then the second. The color drained from his face. They were going to take it no matter what, he whispered. My company, my name, even if I signed everything they asked for. She nodded. And make sure the world believed you deserved it. He sat back, fingers pressed to his forehead. We have to get this into court, he said. We will, she answered, but not yet. Not until Jamal's guy can lock down the metadata and the chain of custody. If we rush this, Hale will tear it apart and call it a forgery. We need to make it impossible to ignore. That night at Manny's again, Jamal stared at the memo like it was radioactive. This, he said quietly, is the roadmap for a corporate mugging. Can your guy verify it? She asked. If he can't, no one can, Jamal said. But Monty, this is the kind of thing people disappear over. She met his eyes. I grew up watching my mother choose between insulin and rent, she said. People like Lark disappear families every day. Just not literally. I'm done pretending not to see. At the far end of the diner counter, the same pale-eyed man from the night before watched them again. This time when their eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't kind. Later, after she'd triple encrypted the memo and copied the USB contents onto 2 separate drives, one hidden inside a hollowed-out cookbook, the other taped beneath the bottom drawer of her dresser, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. You're very busy for someone who used to bleach toilets, the familiar smooth voice said. Found some interesting reading, have you? Her heart slammed against her ribs. Who is this? She asked. Someone who understands that the law is only as clean as the hands holding it, the voice replied. Walk away, Miss Rhodes. You've made your point. You got your little moment on camera. Now go back to your mop. No, she said quietly. Silence crackled on the line. Think carefully about what hill you want to die on, he said at last. Not everyone gets to be a martyr. Most just become collateral damage. The call ended. Amani sat in the dark for a long time. The only light, the tiny blue glow of the USB still plugged into her laptop. Fear gnawed at her. Real fear this time. Not the diffuse kind that comes with overdue bills, but the focused kind that comes when you realize you are stepping in front of something enormous and it has noticed. But beneath the fear was something else. Anger, not just for Cassian, for every person whose silence had been bought or intimidated, so someone like Gideon Lark could add another line of litigation leverage to a spreadsheet. The next day in court, when she stood and handed the sealed memo to the bailiff, the gallery buzzed like a kicked beehive. Your Honor, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, the defense submits an internal memorandum authored by Mr. Gideon Lark, Chief Legal Officer of Orion Holdings, outlining a premeditated strategy to manufacture breach, manipulate signature trails, and defame my client as part of a hostile acquisition plan. Victoria surged to her feet. This is outrageous, she snapped. We have never seen this document. There is no proof it's authentic. The court has ordered an independent forensic review, the judge said, eyes sharp now, and it will receive one. If this memorandum is authentic, Ms. Hale, it raises serious questions about your client's conduct. Phones rose again. Some people watched the judge. More watched the maid. In that moment, for better or worse, she was no longer just the woman in the apron. She was the crack in the facade. And somewhere far from that courtroom, in a boardroom that smelled of polished wood and old money, a man like Gideon Lark was realizing that the person he should have been worried about wasn't the billionaire. It was the maid who refused to look away. By the end of the week, if you typed maid into any search bar, you wouldn't get cleaning services. You'd get her. Clips of Amani's objections, slow-motion shots of her walking up the courthouse steps in her thrift store coat. Think pieces asking, what does it mean when a housekeeper challenges corporate power? Half of them got her name wrong. None of them understood the whole story. On the subway, she watched strangers scroll past her face without realizing she was sitting 3 seats away. It should have felt like validation. It mostly felt like a target painted on her back. At Holt Tower, the staff watched her differently. In the service elevator, Paula from laundry squeezed her hand. I saw you on the news, Paula whispered. My sister in Atlanta texted me a screenshot. You make us proud, girl. They've been walking on us for years. Imani smiled, throat tight. Thank you, she said. Just don't talk about it on the floors yet, okay? I don't want anyone getting dragged into this who didn't choose it. In the main kitchen, the dishwashers paused to clap when she walked through. Go get 'em, Rhodes, one of them called. She ducked her head, embarrassed, but she didn't tell them to stop. Because if you've ever worked in the background of other people's lives, you know how rare it is to be seen at all. That afternoon, she met Cassian in a smaller conference room off his office. He looked different, not less powerful. He could never really look that way, but less certain, less arrogant in the edges. On the table between them were two stacks of paper. One was the forensic analyst's report Jamal's contact had rushed through, a dense explanation of metadata logs, IP traces, encryption signatures, all concluding that the memo and USB contents were consistent with Orion's network architecture. The other stack was a draft. Motion to dismiss on grounds of fraud, evidence tampering, and malicious prosecution, Cassian said, tapping the second pile. My private counsel drew it up overnight. If the judge accepts your memo as authentic, this could end the lawsuit. Imani read the first page carefully. It could end their case, she said, but it shouldn't end the story. He frowned. What do you mean? She looked up at him. They didn't just come for you, she said. Their model is built on this, on scaring smaller partners into silence, on cooking the record. If we walk away now with a quiet dismissal, they'll regroup, lay low, and do it again. He rubbed his temples. What do you suggest? That we burn the entire corporate world down? I suggest, she said slowly, that we fight loud enough that other people who've been through this realize they're not crazy. That we make it impossible for Orion to bury what they've done. He stared at her. You know, a quieter settlement would make your life easier, he said. No more cameras. No more strangers on your subway reading your face off their phones. She thought of the threatening calls, the watching eyes in the diner, the way her chest tightened every time an unknown number appeared on her screen. Then she thought of her mother, working herself into an early grave for employers who smiled and underpaid and fired her the first time she had to take a sick day. I didn't get into this to be comfortable, she said. If I wanted that, I would have kept my head down and just cleaned. He almost smiled. You are a very unreasonable woman, Miss Rhodes. Thank you, she said. That night, she returned to her basement apartment to find a white envelope slid under her door. No name, no return address. Just one sheet of paper inside, typed in a font so clean it was almost antiseptic. You've made powerful enemies. Be careful what hill you die on. Her hands shook. For a second, she considered calling the police. Then she remembered the look in the officer's eye the last time she'd tried to report a landlord for shutting off heat in winter. He'd shrugged and told her to take it up in housing court. She set the note in the sink and lit a match. As the paper burned, the words curled and blackened, shrinking until they were just ash. When she went to bed, she kept the binder on her nightstand, one hand resting on it like a shield. She didn't sleep so much as drift between adrenaline and exhaustion. 2 nights later, she came home from a late strategy session with Jamal to find her door slightly ajar. Every instinct went ice cold. She pushed it open carefully. The lamp on her desk lay on its side. Her chair was moved. Drawers stood open. Clothes spilled like entrails. They hadn't taken the TV, or the microwave, or anything with obvious resale value. They had taken nothing. They'd just touched everything. She backed out and called Jamal from the hallway, her voice steady only because it had no other choice. Someone's been in my place, she said. They didn't steal anything. They just wanted me to know they could be here. He swore softly. I'm calling my cousins in Hoboken, he said. You're not sleeping there tonight. I've got a couch with your name on it and an aunt who will force feed you soup until you can't move. Jamal, I'm not arguing, he said. You may not see yourself as a hero, but you've become the wrong kind of famous to be unprotected. That night, she slept on a floral couch in a cluttered apartment across the river, surrounded by porcelain cat figurines and the soft snore of Jamal's aunt in the next room. It felt both absurd and perfect. The next morning, as they shared coffee at a tiny kitchen table, Imani said, "I want to go public." "You're already public," Jamal said, waving his phone at her. "You're a meme. There's one of you holding the folder with text that says, 'When the maid has more receipts than your lawyer.'" "I mean fully public," she said. "Press conference, documents, no more half-hidden leaks. If they're going to come for me, I want the spotlight so bright they have to squint." He stared at her. "You know there's no going back from that, right?" he asked. "No fading into normal. People will expect you to keep being this." She took a breath. Maybe that's the point. By noon, she was in Holt Tower again, in front of Cassian's desk. "I want to hold a press conference outside the courthouse," she said. "We show the memo, the forensic report, enough of the truth that Orion can't quietly settle and spin this as a misunderstanding. We drag the whole thing into the sun." He frowned. "That makes us both targets," he said. "They're already clawing at my stock price. If I go to war publicly, they'll throw everything at me. PR smears, countersuits, you name it." "You're already in a war," she replied. "The only difference is whether you admit it out loud." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Fine," he said. "We do it together. But we do it with real security, real planning. If I'm putting you in front of cameras, I'm not letting you stand there alone." The press conference hit every news ticker within an hour. A makeshift podium on the courthouse steps, a sea of microphones and flashing cameras. Imani in a plain navy dress, hair pulled back, the apron exchanged for a binder that might as well have been armor. She didn't read a statement. She just spoke. "I was hired to change bed linens and scrub countertops," she said, voice amplified over the hum of the city. "No one expected me to read the contracts sitting on the same desks I dusted. But I did. And what I saw wasn't just one company being targeted. It was a pattern. A system that assumes if you drown the truth in enough legal language, no one will notice." She held up the memo, portions redacted for privacy but still damning. "This document," she said, "is not a mistake. It's a blueprint for using the courts not to seek justice, but to steal." A reporter shouted, "Are you representing yourself as an attorney?" "No," she said. "I'm standing here as what I am, a worker who refused to look away. The law might not recognize me as a lawyer, but I recognize injustice when I see it. And I won't be quiet just because I'm not wearing a $1,000 suit." Beside her, Cassian stepped up to the microphones. "She saved me," he said simply. "Not just my company, my name, my ability to walk into a room and not wonder what lie has been pinned to my back. And if someone who cleans my floors for a living has to be the one to call out this system, then maybe the rest of us, those of us with money, influence, and degrees, should be ashamed." The video went everywhere. People argued in comment sections. Some said she was a hero. Others called her an opportunist. Some said she should know her place. What they all had in common was this: they couldn't ignore her anymore. 2 days later, Jamal called with a voice shaking so slightly she almost missed it. "I think your press conference worked," he said. "Why?" "Because someone from inside Orion just reached out," he said. "Junior associate, wants to talk, says she can't sleep anymore." That night in the back corner of a different diner, dim, out of the way, the kind of place no one paid attention to, a young woman sat hunched over a mug of tea, straight black hair pulled into a messy knot, dark circles under her eyes that looked older than she was. "This is Leah," Jamal said softly. "P. Park," the woman added, voice barely above a whisper. "Leah Park." Imani offered her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said. Leah gripped it like a lifeline. "I shouldn't be here," she blurted. "They make us sign these internal agreements, like mini NDAs, and they tell us if we leak anything, we'll never work in the industry again. But after I saw you on TV and read that memo, I realized I helped build some of those clauses." Her eyes filled. "We thought it was just aggressive lawyering. My mentor said this is how the game is played, that you can't win clean against people like Holt, so you stack the deck first." But then I saw the projections. They had numbers penciled in for how much money they'd make from litigation leverage. "That's not a game. That's theft in slow motion." Imani's throat tightened. "What did they have you do?" she asked gently. Leah swallowed. They told me to adjust timestamps on contract drafts, she said, to route certain revisions through a Swiss VPN and then delete the original logs. Gideon said it was to clean up clutter. But when the lawsuit hit and I saw the documents we filed against Holt, I recognized my own edits, my own fingerprints. She wiped her eyes angrily. I'm not innocent. I did what they asked, but I didn't understand. Not really. Not until it was too late. Imani reached across the table. Understanding now and doing nothing would be worse, she said. You're here. That matters. Are you willing to testify? Under protection? Leah's hands shook. My dad owns a dry cleaning shop in Flatbush, she whispered. He's worked 30 years to keep a roof over our heads. If they come after him, they already are, Jamal said quietly, sliding his phone across the table. A headline glowed on the screen. Orion stock plunges 17% amid rumors of internal memo. SEC inquiry underway. They're bleeding, he said. Cornered animals are dangerous, but they are also clumsy. That can work in our favor. Leah stared at the screen, then at Imani. I'm tired of being quiet, she said. If I have to choose between my career and my conscience, I'd rather be able to sleep. The judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing 3 days later. In the meantime, the threats became less subtle. Someone smashed the front window of Leah's father's shop one night and left a single word spray-painted on the wall inside. Stay. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. Leah called Imani in tears. My dad keeps saying it's just kids, she sobbed. But I know it's not. I'm so sorry, Imani said. We're close. I promise you, we're close. Back at Holt Tower, Cassian paced his office as news of Orion's stock tumble rolled silently across the TV. Lark hasn't shown up to his office for a week, he said. Victoria just filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts. Orion issued a statement saying they vehemently deny all allegations and are cooperating fully with regulators. Which means, Imani said, they're throwing everyone they can under the bus to save whoever's at the top. He stopped pacing and looked at her. How are you holding up? He asked. She hesitated. Tired, she said. A little jumpy. I keep thinking someone's behind me when I ride the subway. But when I see videos of factory workers commenting, this happened to my brother's company too, or janitors posting, we've watched deals like this from the copy room for years. It feels worth it. He nodded. You're becoming the face of something, he said. You didn't ask for it, but it's happening. Then I better make sure I'm saying something worth hearing, she replied. The night before the evidentiary hearing, she sat at Jamal's aunt's kitchen table, pages spread in front of her. Timeline of Orion's internal memos, log of Noah's travel, particularly his suspicious trip to Switzerland, chain of emails between Gideon and the board, including one that made her skin crawl every time she read it. Walker won't see it coming. Make sure Price handles the signature trail. Replace Walker with Holt. One word, same cruelty. She outlined her argument in simple language. If you've ever tried to explain something complicated to someone who doesn't share your vocabulary, you know the discipline it takes. She wasn't just arguing for the judge. She was arguing for everyone watching from the cheap seats, in the gallery and at home, who needed to understand how they could be caught in similar traps. When she finally closed the binder, her eyes ached. She stepped outside onto the tiny balcony to breathe. Across the river, Manhattan glittered. She thought of all the contracts being signed in those towers, all the cleaners vacuuming corporate carpets while the fine print quietly rearranged people's lives. Ready? Jamal asked from the doorway. No, she said, but I'm going anyway. He laughed once. That's the only answer that ever mattered. The morning of the evidentiary hearing dawned gray and oddly still, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Imani climbed the courthouse steps with her binder clutched to her chest, the same way she'd carried cleaning supplies up back staircases for years. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name, some of them finally pronouncing it correctly. She didn't stop. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Law students lined the back rows, clutching notebooks. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder. A few faces from Holt Tower's staff dotted the benches. Kitchen workers on their day off. A security guard who'd seen her sneak textbooks into supply closets. At the plaintiff's table sat a new man, replacing Victoria. Gray hair, perfect posture, suit so dark it almost swallowed light. He looked like someone who'd spent his life never being told no. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled. Today, he said, voice carrying easily, this court will review the evidence presented by the defense regarding alleged fraud and misconduct by Orion Holdings in its case against Holt Systems. Our decision will determine not only whether this lawsuit proceeds, but whether the matter must be referred for further criminal investigation. He turned to Imani. Miss Rhodes, he said, we will begin with you. She stood. Somewhere behind her, a camera zoomed in. If you've ever had to speak while your hands were shaking, you know the trick she used, pressing her fingertips lightly into the wood of the table as she walked forward, letting that subtle resistance remind her she was real. Your Honor, she began, we submit Exhibit F, a series of emails from Orion's General Counsel, Mr. Gideon Lark, to the company's executive board, dated months before the alleged breach by Holt Systems. On the screen behind the judge, the first email appeared. From our Gideon Lark subject, Pressure Path, Holt. As you can see, Imani said, laser pointer circle hovering over a line, Mr. Lark describes a pressure path, his term, for destabilizing Holt's bargaining position. He recommends drafting strategically slanted revisions, and if necessary, initiating litigation under pretext of misrepresentation. The judge read silently. On the plaintiff's side, the new attorney rose. Your Honor, he said, the plaintiff does not deny the authenticity of this email, but we maintain that it has been taken out of context. Mr. Lark was merely discussing hypothetical strategies. Then let's look at the rest of the context, Imani said before the judge could speak. She clicked to the next slide. This time, the email thread showed replies from board members. Make sure Price handles the signature trail, one wrote. Holt, won't see it coming, another responded. Gasps murmured through the gallery. The name Price refers to Mr. Noah Price, Imani said calmly. At the time, Holt's contracts assistant in charge of routing revisions and digital signatures. Shortly after these emails, we see the creation of multiple drafts of the joint venture agreement, one from Holt's IP, one from Orion's Zurich server, and one from a remote session in New Jersey linked to Mr. Price's credentials. She gestured to the three contracts. These are not hypotheticals, she said. They're a plan being executed in real time. The plaintiff's attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, we still contend that Miss Rhodes, as a non-attorney, is drawing conclusions. The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Counsel, he said, you will have ample opportunity to respond. For now, the court will hear her presentation. Imani continued. She called Jamal's forensic contact to the stand. He testified in patient, non-jargon language about IP logs, VPN routes, impossible timestamps. Then she called Leah. The young woman walked to the stand like someone walking into the ocean, hesitant, but with no other choice. Please, state your name for the record, the clerk said. Leah Park, she replied, voice barely above a whisper. And your role at Orion Holdings? Junior associate in the contracts group. Imani stepped closer. Miss Park, she said gently, did anyone at Orion ever instruct you to alter digital records related to Holt Systems? Leah's fingers twisted in her lap. Yes, she said. Mr. Lark. A murmur went up. Can you tell the court what he asked you to do? Imani asked. He told me to adjust timestamps on certain drafts, Leah said, eyes shining, to route them through a Swiss VPN and then delete the original logs. He said it was to streamline clutter and realign the paper trail so it matched the leverage strategy. She swallowed. At the time, I thought it was just aggressive lawyering. I didn't realize they were planning to use those manipulated records to accuse Mr. Holt of fraud. Imani let the silence sit. Sometimes silence says more than any flourish of rhetoric ever could. Why are you testifying today? She asked finally. Leah looked at her, then at the judge. Because I helped build a lie, she said, and I don't want to live the rest of my life pretending I didn't. The plaintiff's attorney tried to discredit her, suggested she was bitter, that she'd been passed over for promotion, that she had an axe to grind. Leah's voice shook, but it did not break. I'm not here because of my career, she said. I'm here because of my conscience. I'm here because Miss Rhodes reminded me that staying quiet doesn't make you neutral. It makes you complicit. When she stepped down, Imani took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Finally, she called Cassian. He didn't need to say much. He confirmed he hadn't personally opened the specific Zurich draft prior to the alleged signature. He admitted, publicly, that he'd been careless, that he'd trusted the system too much. "I am not a victim," he said, voice steady. "I'm a man who nearly let his arrogance and busyness destroy him. But I want the record to reflect that the only reason we are here today, the only reason this truth is surfacing, is because a woman hired to clean my home refused to treat my life like a job she could do with her eyes closed." Imani almost told him to stop. She didn't want the story to become a fairy tale about the grateful billionaire and the noble maid. But she also understood something crucial. Sometimes the people in the spotlight have to use their brightness to illuminate those the world would rather keep in shadow. She ended her presentation not with a flourish, but with a simple statement. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't just a question of whether Orion lied on paper. It's a question of what we accept as normal. If we tell ourselves that using the courts as a weapon is just how business works, then we've given up on justice and settled for theater. I am not here because I wanted to be. I am here because I saw something wrong and I couldn't unsee it." She folded her hands. "And I'm asking this court to say, clearly, that the law belongs to all of us, not just those who can afford people like Mr. Lark." The judge called a recess. When he returned, the room was so quiet you could hear the creak of the wood as he sat. "I have reviewed the evidence presented," he said. "The internal memoranda, the digital forensics, the testimony of Miss Park, and the cross-examination." He paused. "The pattern is unmistakable." He looked over his glasses at Orion's counsel. "This court finds that the lawsuit brought by Orion Holdings against Holt Systems was tainted at its origin by bad faith, fraudulent evidence, and unethical conduct. The case is dismissed with prejudice." A collective exhale swept the room. Imani's knees almost gave out. But the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore," he said, voice sharpening, "based on the record before this court, I am referring these findings to the United States Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission for investigation into potential criminal and civil violations by Orion Holdings and its officers." He lifted the gavel. "This court is adjourned." The sound echoed like a door slamming shut on one world and opening into another. Outside, the steps were a forest of microphones again. When someone shouted, "Miss Rhodes, do you have a comment?" She hesitated. Then she stepped forward. "Justice is slow," she said simply, "but it never stops walking. Today it just happened to walk through a courtroom that wasn't expecting me. Tomorrow it might walk through your workplace, your housing office, your hospital. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't belong to you." Beside her, Cassian added, "This woman didn't just defend me. She defended every worker whose voice was treated as background noise. We owe her more than a headline. We owe her a better system." The months that followed blurred. Investigations into Orion. Gideon Lark quietly resigning, then disappearing from public view. Regulators rooting through old deals like archaeologists digging up fossils of corruption. Imani turned down television show offers, book deals, reality show pitches that wanted to turn her life into episodic content. Instead, she wrote one long op-ed for a serious magazine, breaking down the case in plain language. Not glamorous, necessary. A year later, the courtroom was different. Smaller, less polished, no cameras. A brass plaque outside the door read, "The People's Law Project." Inside, rows of folding chairs held bus drivers, home health aides, hotel cleaners, retail workers. Imani stood at a lectern at the front. She wasn't in an apron or a navy dress, just jeans and a soft sweater, a pen tucked behind her ear out of habit. "Most of you know my story," she began. "Some of you are probably sick of hearing it." A few people laughed. "I never set out to become anybody's symbol," she said. "All I ever wanted was to finish law school, make enough to keep my family safe, maybe help a few people along the way. Life had other plans, it usually does." She looked around the room. "But here's what I've learned. Justice doesn't start with lawyers, it starts with workers, with tenants, with nurses and janitors and cashiers who see something wrong and decide it's their business. The law is just a language. Power hopes you'll never learn to speak it." She gestured to a table at the side of the room where volunteers sat with laptops and stacks of forms. That's why we're here, she said. The People's Law Project exists so you don't have to whisper your problems into the void and hope someone important overhears you. You are important. Your story is evidence. Your voice is testimony. At the back of the room, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, Cassian watched quietly. He'd offered to put his name on the project. She'd said no. His money funded the rent and the translation services and the litigation costs. But the name on the door was hers. After the meeting, a young woman approached her. Black curls, backpack slung over one shoulder, a battered copy of Civil Procedure for Beginners clutched in her hands. "Miss Rhodes," she said, voice trembling with a mix of nerves and determination. "I work nights at a warehouse, and I take classes during the day. When I saw you on the news last year, I thought maybe I wasn't stupid for wanting to do this. I want to fight for people like us. But sometimes I feel like the whole system is designed to spit me out." Imani took the book, thumbed through the dog-eared pages, then handed it back. "The system is designed to resist you," she said, "not spit you out. That means you're exactly the kind of person it needs to change. Start with listening to your coworkers, to your customers, to your own gut. The law is a tool. The real work is knowing who you're using it for." The girl nodded, eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. A week later, Imani walked into a small dry cleaning shop in Flatbush. The glass had been repaired months ago, but she could still see the faint outline where paint had once spelled stay. Leah's father stood behind the counter pressing a shirt. "You must be Miss Rhodes," he said, looking up with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "My daughter says you're tougher than steel and softer than bread." Imani laughed. "That's an interesting combination." He poured her a cup of coffee so strong it practically stood up in the mug. "When Leah was little," he said, "she used to sit in the back and draw heroes in capes. I'd tell her, 'Baby, in this world, people like us don't get capes. We get aprons, uniforms, name tags.' I thought I was protecting her. Then you walked into that courtroom." His voice thickened. "You didn't just change your story," he said. "You changed hers. Mine too. So, thank you." Imani blinked hard. "None of this happened alone," she said. "You raised a daughter who could tell the difference between a paycheck and a conscience. That's its own kind of heroism." On her way back to the train, she passed a mural on a brick wall. It showed a woman in an apron, arms folded, standing between a looming skyscraper and a small group of workers holding papers. Above her, in bold white letters, were the words, "She didn't ask for permission." Graffiti had been added in smaller letters at the bottom. "Neither should we." She took a picture. Not for the internet, for herself. That night at her kitchen table, new apartment, better light, same worn laptop, she opened a folder marked simply, "Legislation Draft." The People's Law Project had handled dozens of cases in its first year. Wrongful firings, retaliation against whistleblowers, landlords trying to evict tenants on technicalities. But she'd realized something. Helping one person at a time wasn't enough. The rules themselves needed rewriting. She began outlining a proposed expansion of whistleblower protections for contract workers and lower-level staff. Those like Leah, like herself, who'd been closest to the evidence, but furthest from legal safety. Halfway through a sentence, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The old fear pricked up for a moment. She answered anyway. Imani Rhodes. A woman's voice, hesitant, came through the line. Hi. You don't know me. My name is Cassandra. I clean offices in Midtown. Last week I found something in a trash can. It looks like a contract with two different signatures. The supervisor told me it was none of my business and to forget it. But I can't. I don't know what to do. Imani felt something in her chest settle into place. You did the right thing calling, she said gently. You're not alone in this. We can look at it together. Do you feel safe meeting at our office tomorrow? A tiny, shaky breath. Yes, Cassandra whispered. Thank you. After she hung up, Imani sat for a moment, listening to the hum of the fridge, the distant siren somewhere outside, the quiet rustle of the city being itself. She thought of that first day in the courtroom, apron-stained, hands trembling around a battered folder. She thought of Gideon Lark's memo, of Leah's tears on the stand, of Cassian's face when the judge dismissed the case. She thought of her mother, who never lived to see any of this, but who had once told her, "Don't let them convince you that your voice is furniture, baby. Furniture doesn't talk back." Imani closed her eyes and whispered to the empty kitchen, "We're not done." Because justice, she'd learned, isn't a single verdict. It's a practice. And as long as there were contracts written to crush people who would never be invited into the room where they were drafted, as long as there were cleaners finding shredded evidence in bins and clerks told to just adjust that timestamp, there would be a need for someone willing to say, "I will defend him, and her, and them," even if the world still thought she should be mopping in silence.